Okay. Have you guys ever known what would happen in the courts if somebody committed adultery in the 1940s? Like when they get divorced. Now, when you get divorced and you commit adultery, I don't think any court cares at all. But I guess they did back then. Um, so I knew that my grandma wasn't allowed to remarry after her first husband until what I was told is he remarried. However, I do have the divorce papers from then, which is pretty cool. It's from 1945. And they took this all the way to the Supreme Court in New York, or whatever the Supreme Court was at that time. It does say at the top that it's a special term of the Supreme Court held in the county of Broome at their courthouse. And so my grandma cheated on her first husband, which I knew that, with my grandpa, who they did later marry in California. But what I didn't know is my grandma was not allowed to remarry, period. So in here, which is so interesting, is the plaintiff will be allowed to marry again in the same manner as if the defendant was actually dead. So that's my grandma. So it's as if she's dead. He can totally remarry. But my grandma, it would be unlawful for her to marry any other person until her ex-husband was actually dead. Like, how crazy is that? She committed adultery. Who knows why? Perhaps the marriage wasn't working out. Perhaps he wasn't a nice guy. Perhaps they weren't good together. But just the fact that a court in that time would allow for the man to remarry and not the female, just because the female committed adultery, I think is just so different and so odd from today, and so very interesting. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Does anybody else have any stories about their grandparents divorcing in the 1940s at all? What ended up happening is my grandma and my grandpa, and that was her second husband because he died before I was born, moved to California so she could remarry. And they did eventually remarry after my grandpa's ex decided to give him a divorce, which was years later, because from what I hear, she wouldn't do it. But anyways, it's just weird. I'd like to hear your guys' stories, though, about it, if you have any.